What's up, everybody? Happy November, and welcome to another episode of Log Talk with Pert Near Outdoors. So this is Billy here, and just really excited to introduce this week's podcast, as I was able to sit down with my brother Jimmy and my dad Bill, and the three of us were up at our family deer camp. Really, the first time that the three of us have been up at camp together this year, and hopefully the first of many podcasts that we'll record while we're up there together. And this week's episode is, I think it's one that everyone will really enjoy, and there's a little bit of fun in there, and I'm not going to edit or cut this thing at all. I'm just going to kind of let it be raw as it is, because I think I get entertainment, and I hope the rest of you do get entertainment out of just us, the three of us, going back and forth at each other, and some of the stuff that just happens when you're hanging out at camp having a conversation. So I think that's pretty fun, and we dig into some good stuff, which I think everybody can relate to, and some of the new hunters out there, and even some folks that have been hunting for a long time but maybe haven't been in a bunch of different scenarios, with some different tracking situations where you've hit a deer or an animal for that sake, but you've hit a deer and you're trying to figure out what to do, what's the best thing, how to handle the situation. And after a few conversations that we've had on the podcast and on our breedinum radio segment over the last few weeks, definitely, some things came out where we were like, hey, we should do a podcast where we discuss, things that we've learned and different scenarios we've come across over the years of hunting. So I hope everyone enjoys this one, and I know we definitely enjoyed recording it, so I think you will enjoy it. So definitely check it out, enjoy this, and as for our breeding radio segment, really been enjoying that so far, and I hope you all are too. And if you would like to get involved, we definitely want to keep getting some new people in. If you shoot a buck, we definitely want to get on the horn with you and hear your story. And it doesn't matter where you are, even if you're outside New York State, but you're having fun tagging along and like to share an exciting story you had, please reach out to us. Either send us a message on Instagram or tag us in a post, and we'll be happy to reach out and get your story out there. So thanks again. Appreciate everybody's support. Appreciate you listening, and enjoy this week's podcast. In the meantime, get out there and whack the big one. See ya. Oh, just look at it. It's just so big and shiny. Bush. Bush.
I hope you shoot a big old 2.5-year-old tomorrow.
I hope I shoot a 2.5-year-old tomorrow.
I hope I shoot like a heavy racked year and a half.
Yeah.
I got a whole file of them saved waiting for Christmas pictures. Just got to wait and see which one you kill first.
Right.
I don't shoot by age. I shoot by number of points per side. He's got at least 2 per side.
Yeah. You change your mind all the time.
No, I have. I'm going to hold out this year.
Yeah, this year will be different.
So about 8:30 tomorrow morning, the first one that walks by.
I'm
Yeah.
not jumping on the first ball.
I can't wait for that phone call. I just shot one.
Oh, he's big. I'm
He's
not
big.
sure how
He's real
he
big.
is.
You get down there, it's that 1.5-year-old 8-point.
I don't know. I think I hammered him.
So you got a game plan for this, Joe?
Yeah, I got a game plan.
Show notes.
No show notes. Do you have show notes?
No. No time, Willie.
Nobody got time for
We
that.
got these microphones are picking up everything.
Does it sound good on the brim of my hat?
Sounds great on the brim of your
Can you
hat.
grab me a bush?
It's a brim mic,
When when you have a beard such as mine, it doesn't even
Yeah, the
allow
squirrels.
room for
The
a
squirrels.
mic.
Bush?
Do I need another bush? No, I just cracked this one. I want to keep them cold. Jimmy's got that fire so hot that.
I mean, we can keep them cold because we got our koozies.
Right, you're right. These are high quality Pert Near koozies. We're doing a
Just
podcast.
waiting for you.
Yeah.
I used to sit in this chair.
No.
I got to sit in it last week.
What was it
His
like?
back was so fucked up, he was all over the place. He couldn't stay in one chair.
The poor guy's a mess.
Yeah.
What do I got to do?
You take the microphone and you put it near your face.
Put it near your face.
Say something.
Test 1 2. Test.
Oh, you're a little
Test
quiet.
1 2.
Testing 1 2.
Check.
Oh, that's better.
So you're just dialing her in until you hear
Just
her right.
dialed. She's dialed.
Yeah.
Would it be better on the brim of a hat?
No, it sounds great there.
I'm only doing that because my beard's too big to put it on my sweatshirt.
Yeah, Jimmy.
I could talk like Zale and just keep you on the top.
Like, yeah.
I'll tell you what we got to do.
That's the way he talks.
I know that's the way he naturally talks.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to work on my impression because that would be a great impression.
It would be a good impression.
Yeah.
He,
I think if we just, if we,
he says, a lot.
I can't say anything. I say a lot.
Yeah, that's the worst part about doing a podcast. You hear how bad some of your speech, like this.
That's how you get better. A lot of ums and yes and and
Yeah. It's all right. So.
Bronchiolitis doesn't help much either.
No bronchitis. So yeah, it's Friday night.
Are we on?
We're on.
Feeding them.
Feeding them.
Yeah, we are feeding
Heck
them.
with feeding them, breeding them.
No, that's a different segment.
Okay.
No,
I'm
but
sorry.
we can talk about breeding. We're in it. There's nothing happening, but we're in it.
Yeah, I mean everybody says it's here.
We had a lot of high hopes. It's typically how it's going to go. We talk.
That's typical for here, though. I mean, you go pretty much anywhere else back around home in the farmland, you see shit going down. You get up here and it's just dead.
That's only because you can't see anything up here.
They're all
100
somewhere.
yards away, it could be on.
Yeah.
You're missing it.
But the cameras they really aren't showing anything.
Not showing daytime yet. You had that one buck over in the
One.
brush.
One time.
The last 2 nights I've had the same 2 bucks about the same time at night coming through.
Yeah, middle of the night.
Well, the one was 5:30 in the morning, so he's close to a daylight walker.
It's not
Notice
really.
that.
It's not really night. It's night, but it's morning.
But it's dark.
Late night, early morning.
Dark early morning.
Darkness.
Darkness. So for this week's podcast, I wanted to have the three of us. We not very often we can sit down in the quiet. We're in the pert near your goatee's rubbing on the microphone.
Are you hearing that?
Yeah.
You should wear a ball cap and put it on your brim.
God darn it. This is gonna be tough to keep.
Go ahead, keep talking.
It's gonna be tough to keep people
I
engaged
got nothing
when
to say anyway. Remember, I vowed to say less.
you did.
We all know that's not going to happen.
I had some people at work actually tell me that I need to be nicer to you on this podcast, Dad, and I'm sorry. Because
I don't see where that's coming from.
what do you mean?
When were you mean to him?
Well, I made a comment the last time we were all on that, like, Dad wanted to say something, and I was like, oh, you always got to have the last word.
Oh, that's just funny stuff.
It's funny
And
to
true.
us, but
Because you both have to have the last word.
right.
Test. Check. Okay.
your brim mic works great too.
All right.
Oh shit, that's funny. So we've had a bunch of podcasts, and we're doing this breedinum radio where we're getting some guys on there telling their stories about either kill shots or we've had a couple of misses, and also something that's kind of come about. And I think we all listen to a lot of podcasts. We all listen to a lot of Jim.
It's going to happen.
It's
man.
gonna happen. There's a lot of stuff out there about like how to get yourself in the right spot for being there so you can see the deer and you can get an opportunity to shoot at him. And then there's a lot of talk about. I mean, that's kind of it. And then you get the deer, and then what? Or you make the shot, and then what? So, my buddy Connor, he hit a buck last Saturday, and that was the first deer he's ever shot with his bow, and it kind of drew an awareness to me that, like, I think that it'd be very valuable to sit here and have a conversation about just some of the do's and don'ts and some of the things that we've all learned over the years trailing deer and tracking deer that either we've shot or other people have shot, some of the lessons that we've learned. So I think that'd be something cool to dive into here tonight with the three of us and kind of maybe highlight some of the things that are like for you, Dad, like when you hit a deer, like what's the first thing you do? Because I think when you're a new hunter, if you don't have somebody right with you that, there might be people that have been hunting their whole lives, but they've never really had somebody teach them how to track, and they've just either they find the deer or they don't. But that deer could be laying dead 100 yards away. They just didn't really necessarily know how to track it. So that sounds like something you want to dive into.
Yeah, sure. I think, in my opinion, the tracking starts the minute you make the shot. You know what I mean? Like you release the arrow or you pull the trigger, tracking starts right there. I mean, you have to make a mental note of exactly where that deer was, what the behavior was, and then watch it as far as you can running off, noting how it's running. Does it run a little bit and stop? It's a hunch.
Right.
Does it stop and the tail flickers? Is it, a foot off the ground, running crazy, crashing, smashing, right? That's a good sign usually.
Yeah.
That's what happened
So I think that
Wednesday night.
Yeah, so exactly, that's what I was thinking of. But
there wasn't no track job there. You knew she was laying there dead. But
typically the tracking, it seems like you may have one, like you get a one lung or something, right? Like Mike shot that huge 6-point, and I don't even know how far we tracked that, but it was over 2 days. Well, we got it the second day.
It had to have been 2-3 miles.
But we, it's a miracle we got that deer, and it was, he wasn't sure what kind of hit he had, but we had jumped the deer. You guys had jumped it before I hooked up with you. I was on the other hill. You were on the south. I was on the north.
Yeah.
But I hooked up with you in the valley. But usually when you get tracks that long, either you never get the deer or you never find the deer, right? Like that, we didn't have much of any blood trail. It was such a huge deer that we were tracking by tracks. And
the majority of that track job was done on going the route that we saw him out of his first bed.
Right.
Staying on a big track, finding one speck of blood.
Literally
like
one speck.
Every couple 100 yards.
Yeah.
And then we jumped him again off of the other hill and actually got to watch him run by.
And he ran weak, remember that?
Yeah, he ran weak and he went back downhill.
He went downhill and he was just, you could tell he was not.
You could see the hole behind the shoulder.
Yeah.
But that chest cavity was so freaking big on that deer, and it was a little high. And I think, what was it, the back, was it liver or was it the back of lungs too?
It was the back of lung and the liver.
But that deer just bled inside, and he was not leaving much of any sign.
But to back up, I mean, what I was saying is I think it's so important, and it's so hard, but yet important, to have those first 2, 3, 4 seconds, right? It happens so fast, but you got to be like listening to the shot. What did it sound like, and where the deer went?
I'm sorry, I'm sitting here looking at you two with your microphone.
I was thinking the same thing when I'm looking at him freaking wagging his wire around on the brim of his hat.
You're fine.
So,
I'm sorry.
But I think that's where it starts, right? Because a lot of times people, you get so excited, you're not watching that. And then, so I think in any track job, that's where it starts. And obviously, like a track job you had the other night, Jim,
That's not a track job.
No, you knew it was.
And you knew it was dead.
Yeah.
But so that's where it starts, is gathering data the minute you release the arrow or the minute you make the shot.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing that's hard about that is, I've shot a ton of deer with my bow, and I'll still misread it, right after the shot. Like you saw where the arrow hit. You watch the deer's behavior, and like that one this year, based upon where I saw the arrow, I was for sure I had gut. And the way he ran off and stood there.
Yeah, that was odd.
I'm like, that had to have been a gut shot. Like, I hit him way back, and it came out. I could see it behind the shoulder on the opposite side. That's not like I was tight up to the shoulder. And just everything about that told me that I had gut shot him. And that's why I left him overnight, and I come in the next morning, and I didn't even have gut on the arrow.
Yeah.
And the arrow was still in him, but...
Well, if the arrow's still in him, so you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So that's what you got to do is, it was like the one I left last year. I hit a buck, and then I saw him going down in to the brush there by the Forgotten Stand, and I just said, it was Sunday night, it was about dark.
You're out of arrows.
I'm just going to leave him.
Yeah,
I might have been out of arrows.
Yeah, you were Robin Hood out there.
Yeah.
But, you don't know that buck. I mean, he was probably dead before I got home. and I came back up at first light and got him. But yeah, I think that the tracking is. I think once you get into a track job, that's where it becomes, a science, and you continue to gather evidence.
So let's dive into like a few different track jobs and talk about kind of how it unfolded. So like you already brought up Mike's 6-point, which that was a couple day long track job. So he shoots that deer in the morning, correct?
Yeah. Right.
And then how quickly after, he wasn't sure that there was a lot of leaves on the deer
fast.
came out of nowhere, happened real fast. He shot it. The deer runs off. No real idea where he hit it or anything.
Right, because he's in the pines, so he doesn't know really which way it went. He's going by sound. He knows generally.
Yeah. So he knows where the deer was standing. So then, from that point forward, how did you guys approach that?
And
I want to say it was
there. So
I want to say it was like 3 hours later we went after it.
Well, he was way up on the South Hill, so it took a while to get some guys there.
I think we were all over on the North Hill.
Yeah.
But I believe it was 2-3 hours after the hit, at least. And we started on blood, and there wasn't a ton, but there was a blood trail. And it went for the side hill, and as we were coming up, the way we blood trail, normally you have 2-3 guys, and you'll have one guy stand at last blood and have last blood marked, and you'll have the other 2 guys searching out in front of you for the next blood.
Yeah.
And it's not like you don't just find blood and then 2 guys go out and they're just wandering trying to find next blood. I mean, you're sitting there at that last blood looking for leaves kicked up or looking for which
see if
way
there's a
he
deer
went.
trail that they might be on.
If you don't have a great blood trail, we don't want to be tipping over a leaf that could have that one freaking speck on it.
Yeah.
So we went very slow on blood to the edge of the hill, and right when we crested the hill, there was a little bench down there, and he was laying on it. And he got up, and he ran off, and we didn't see him great, but we just saw the deer and saw him move. And we gave it a couple minutes, and we worked down to where the bed was, and his knees, there was like a wet spot kind of on the bench, and his knees were like implanted, like trying to get up, and we're like, man, he is hurting. So there was some blood in the bed, but not much at all. And that's kind of when we started going by track, because there wasn't any blood after that other than a couple of specks here or there. But
that hill was so steep that when he went down, he tore it up, right?
Yeah, so you could follow that. But then he hit the logging road and started walking.
Right. So then that's when I met up with you, when he hit the logging road, and we tracked him back west in the valley on this old logging road. And his track was profoundly bigger than any other track. There was a lot of tracks, but his was just like incredibly.
It had to have taken us a couple hours to get across that valley, though.
Yeah.
And the valley's not that wide, but it was just there was nothing to go.
It was in the afternoon when we were across the valley, and we really kind of just lost it.
Yeah.
And we couldn't find another track, and we were really stumped.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget looking up. From that point, I looked up on the North Hill, and there was one like kind of profound, looked like a knob, not a knob. I mean,
like a root ball looking.
There's just a little spot that you could tell was level, and I'm like, if I was that buck, I'd have laid up there because you can watch this whole valley. And I remember saying to Jimmy, I said, go up there, see if there's any blood on that little protrusion there, on that little flat. And Mike and I kept looking, and Jimmy climbed all the way up there, and he got up there, and he goes, I got blood. So.
Yeah, I think it was on one of the trails that cut off the logging road up into that spot.
So we got up there, and we found his bed. He was bedded in that spot.
And he had got up and moved.
And then we kept tracking west-southwest, and we're on top of the North Hill, and we're going through some pretty open hardwoods.
Yeah, it was wide open.
And we got fairly close to him. And it was you, myself, and Mike, and I don't know if anybody.
No, it was just us.
And he, that buck, got up and ran across in front of us, but you could just tell he was very weak.
Yeah. And
we said, we got it. We were way back. We had covered a lot of ground. We're like, we got to stop bumping him. We're going to push him right off the property. So we said, let's just get out of here. We know he ran down that road. We'll find him in the morning. But in the morning, we were just going by tracks. I don't think there was any blood down there.
No, we had no blood.
So
we kind of went by track, and then where he threw us for a loop at the end, I want to say we found a little bit of blood. Or we found a big track. But it went into the creek that runs through the valley.
That creek,
and then the other side of the creek, it looked like something was like struggling trying to get out of the creek. And then once we got over there, it crossed back again, and you could see where it was messed up, on the banks. But I want to say we had a little bit of blood there just to know we were in the right spot. But also it was just a weird area where, like, on the deer trail crossing the creek, you could see that it was like a struggle.
You could see where the knees were, like he was following to his knees or something.
Yeah.
So we were actually probably, within 10, 20 yards of him.
Then, we were on the edge of the creek, and we were standing there looking at it, trying to figure out what he did. And we were almost like throwing our arms up, like I have no idea where he went. And I just happened to look left in the field. There was a goldenrod field there, and I could see the horn sticking up. He was laying right there dead. But I mean, that was easily, I would say, 2 miles from the shot.
Yeah.
But we probably tracked him 3 miles.
Yeah.
Well, and so, on that track job, that very easily could have just said, it was a bad hit.
We almost gave up in the valley because we had nothing to go on.
If you were tracking that deer yourself, I almost guarantee you never would have found it.
Yeah.
Well, and it was really just not giving up and knowing that deer had to go somewhere, and knowing that by that time when we were in the valley and we lost his track, and it was kind of wet down there, a ton of deer tracks, and it's like if he walked through here, this is all of a sudden we just lost his track. So when he had to have cut up. So we found that, and that was, we never would have got him.
No.
If we hadn't gone up there and found that bed. Now I'll guarantee you he saw us coming down the valley and jumped out of that bed and went to his next bed. But that was, usually when you get a track job like that, you never get the deer,
No, that was ridiculous.
So it was really amazing that, that we ever got that deer. And it was, I don't know, wasn't that a Pope and Young? Or did it?
It was,
I want to say
it was like 130 as a 6 point.
As a 6 point.
Yeah.
I want to say it was like one of the biggest 6 points in the Northeast.
Yeah, it was like the 8th biggest 6 point ever killed in the Northeast.
Giant, yeah. It didn't even look real.
No.
But, you get into these track jobs, and that's one of the questions that always comes up is, all right, when do we break off, right? And typically, we don't break off until you have no more evidence, and then you search that area. And, if you have nothing to go on, we break off. As long as we have something to go on, we keep going.
Did the arrow pass through on the shot?
Yeah.
Did he have the arrow?
Yeah, I want to say we had it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like bubbly blood. It was like just that.
It was dark
red blood.
Like liver blood.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he nicked.
I think the entry was high.
He nicked the back of one lung and he put it through the liver.
Yep.
And that deer was just so freaking big that it took him that long to die out. That hole was high in the chest cavity.
Yep.
On a 200-pound deer, and it was just not coming out.
Yep.
And I think
he was just filling up.
I think back to that 8 point you shot over here. I think it was Halloween
it was Halloween.
It was on October 31st.
Yep.
And we tracked over there into the night, and we lost it in that thick brush.
But we didn't track it that far. But we didn't have good blood.
We lost the blood entirely. We didn't have anything, and
that was a gut shot. I had that one back.
And then you and Jim pursued that the next day and ended up finding him.
And he didn't go far.
No.
So talking about the one from Mike's, it's like, that one there, you're going by, if you don't have blood, don't just give up. Especially if you're in the hardwoods, that sort of scenario, look for tracks.
There was also some stuff to go by on that one. It wasn't just we didn't have blood. It was like we jumped him out of a bed. We knew.
We knew he laid down.
He was within. Yeah. He was within 150 to 200 yards of the original hit.
Yeah.
And he was bedded,
which is a good sign. So
and he let us get about on top of him before he jumped up and ran away.
Yeah.
So we knew he was hurting. We knew it was probably fatal.
And then he continued to bed.
So your doe from a couple weeks ago,
right? You
knew you hit it high in that kind of no man's zone above the shoulder, and that deer, we were on specs for the first 150 yards. Me and Mike were like on our hands and knees trying to find specks. And you could kind of just tell where the trail was running through the leaves, and you'd find a speck every once in a while. And then it started to open up a little bit more, but there was no bubbles in it. We ended up finding the arrow after about 150, 200 yards.
Yeah.
Still no bed. It opened up a little bit more after the arrow came out. But then we went another 150, 200 yards, and no bed. The blood had dried up. We were finding like one speck every 30, 40 yards.
Right. And it never once bedded down.
It walked by a ton of bedding, and then it ended up walking right down the middle of a logging road.
Yeah.
And
So
it's dropping a speck here or there.
That
so
there's telling you that deer is not
Right.
fatally wounded.
I mean, if you'd have had a bed somewhere in between there, we would have kept going.
Yeah, beds are critical.
Yep.
But to not have a bed and be walking down the middle of a logging road in the middle of a day,
Yeah.
leaving one drop every once in a while, you know, that deer was not hurting.
Right. So lesson from Mike's, buck bedded early. So that's something to keep in mind. If you hit an animal, whether it's with a gun or with a bow, doesn't matter. If you don't find it in 100 yards dead, but you find a bed, that thing is hurting. You put a hit on that deer does not want to go anywhere.
Right.
And if you bump it out of that bed, you know, if it's a colder evening and it's into the dark, you're better off. If you don't have great blood in that bed, you're better off backing out and coming back first thing in the morning for it. All depending, or give it 4 or 5 hours and come back in the middle of the night. And that's what the Kirsches that I hunt with, that's what we do a lot. If we shoot something in the evening, we're not sure about the hit, we'll leave it, we'll go back to the shop, we'll hang out, we'll do whatever, and then come back at midnight and go out and look for it then. You know, give it that 4 or 5 hours to try to let it expire.
Yeah.
If you really
we did that,
sure.
Jim. You had shot a doe back home when you were younger, and we waited till like 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and we went out and retrieved it. So that's the other option. I think the number one most important thing, especially in late day hunts, is not to bump them out of the bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, if
definitely.
you had a deer that was hit, probably a liver, gut, or both, that buck a couple years ago.
The one on Monkey
And you
Run.
saw that deer bedded, and we gave it several hours, like 4 or 5 hours.
Oh yeah, it was 4 or 5 hours easy.
And then I was sneaking in above it, and you had eyes on it, and you know, we were thinking the deer would expire. You know, we really could have just backed out of there.
That deer had been laying right there dead the next day.
And right, that deer, or close by.
Yeah.
Right. But I was sneaking in, and I ended up, you know, the deer, I don't know, winded me or saw me or something.
Well, yeah, you were texting me, and I was watching you, and you're like, "Where's the deer?" I'm like 30 yards away from you.
Yeah.
Like he was tucked under a pine tree.
He was right under a pine tree. But from that point, he never bedded again, I don't think, for, what would you say, 500-600 yards.
Oh yeah, once he got up and ran, he was.
So that's what happens, right? You get one that, you know, that deer probably would have expired there or very near that spot.
It would have been that
he probably
general
would have got
area.
up, moved a little.
He would have.
But we would have known where he was, and we completely lost him, and that's when we had to bring in the dog.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing. I think that's happened to us numerous times. It happened with a buck that Mike shot over here, down low south, and we gave it 6 hours, and then it was like a Sunday, and we were like, we got to go get it because we got to work tomorrow. So we went over there, and he was in the tree stand guiding me to where he last saw it, and sure enough, I bump it, and so we ended up getting it. But the point is that it's like once you get them out of that bed, now you don't know where they're going to go, and they're not going to leave good blood. So you're really in trouble. So the gut shot ones are tough. You really, you know, I don't know what, 12, 18 hours, you know, I would say.
If you have it and it's not going to be super warm.
But that's where it comes in knowing. Like Mike knew where he hit that deer. You knew where you hit that deer.
Yeah, because I watched him. When I hit him, like you said, it starts from the time that you shoot.
Yeah.
I knew the shot was back and low, but it didn't act like a gut shot. And when I called the guy Bob Yaks about the tracking dog, he asked me all these questions, and right away he was like, "That was a liver hit."
What was he, like? What sort of questions is he asking? Because he's
asking obviously placement of the arrow, and behavior of the deer. Like, what did it do after you shot it? So I walked him through the whole thing. I'm like, I shot it. He went up above. He stood there. And then he turned around, he walked back by, but too far out of range. And then he just kept on going. He would go probably like 20, 30 yards and just stand there. 20, 30 yards and just stand there. And then he finally got like, I don't know, he had to be about 100 yards or 120 yards away from me. And he tucked himself under a pine tree. I think he might have stood up and laid back down like 2-3 times, just like he was uncomfortable. But it did not look like a gut shot at all. He wasn't hunched where he couldn't walk. He was just uncomfortable.
Right.
And he knew he was hurt and didn't want to go anywhere. And as soon as I told Bob all that stuff, he was like, that's a liver shot. He's dead. I was like, okay. He was like, 2 o'clock tomorrow. I'll meet you there. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And of course, when Dad jumped the deer up, he ran back by me, and I got a wounded deer running by me. I threw an arrow at it at 50 yards on the run.
Like you threw it at it?
Yeah, with my hand, I
That's
just
not
threw
very,
it at it.
I mean, you're not a good throw.
I hit him in the leg, so he drew new blood. So there was new blood there on the logging road where he crossed, so we put the dog on that, and right away the dog took off. And the way I was sitting in the tree stand, the hill breaks, and I can see to the left, but I can't see to the right. And when that deer ran over that hill, I was watching to the left. I never saw him come out to the left. So, we're talking about doing this without a dog. I'm like, if we come back tomorrow and we go down that trail and go to the right, he's going to be laying somewhere on that side hill dead. So we back out of there. And I got looking on Facebook, and I've heard all these people talking about the dog trackers, and that's when I got a hold of Bob. And he told me he'd meet us there. So we went there. We got on the track. The dog took us over the edge of the hill on the logging road where I saw the deer go. And then all of a sudden he goes left. And right away me and Dad are like, he didn't go that way. And Bob's looking at us like, yes, he did.
Yeah. Dog said he went that way.
Dog said he went that way. He went that way. And Dad kept questioning him as we were going because there was no blood. There was no nothing.
No.
But the dog was on it. And he was Bob was like, he got into one spot and started circling. And that's when you started questioning him again. And Bob was like, he goes, let him work it out. Let him work it out. And he gets up and finally picks a line.
He worked that area for a long time.
Yeah, after he circled and made his way out, Bob was like, we're on it again. I'm like, all right. So we just kept following him. And we go down, cross the road, get up on a ridge. And Bob goes, yep, here's a speck of blood. Like one speck. And probably 700 yards of tracking. There was one speck of blood. He goes, yep, we're still on it. Here's the blood. And then it wasn't another 100 yards and the deer was laying there dead. He goes, yep, here's your deer. And it's like that deer was in the complete opposite direction.
We had it in our head where we would go
yeah.
search for that deer, and it wouldn't have been there.
If we did not call that dog in, we never would have found that deer.
No. And I think that's an important thing that, you can only track so much visually. And when you get into these tough ones, especially if you feel, I was sold on these tracking dogs. I mean, what a service that,
it's unreal.
Bob and the other folks that do that. It's an amazing thing. And that deer never would have been retrieved if it hadn't been for that. So, we can only do so much, and you get in those tough jobs. And, I follow Bob Yaks now pretty closely on Facebook, and I love reading his stories. Like, he'll go get 2 or 3 deer a day, and he does a write-up on each one.
Yeah.
And it's so educational.
Where the hit was, how the deer acted, where it went, how they found it.
How far it went.
Yeah.
So
it's incredible. But you look back, when Mike shot that 6-point, that's not something that I don't even know if it was available back then, or just without social media, you didn't know about it.
Right. And if you didn't know him, you had
if you'd have jumped that deer the first time, like now, after using that tracking dog, if I have a questionable shot and I jump that deer once, I'm backing out of there and I'm not going back without a dog. And I'll give it as long as Bob says we need to give it, because he's done this a lot of times, and I think you can mess up more than you can do good in by trying to go after something that's not mortally wounded and is going to die quick. Like if you do it right, if you leave that animal in its bed and don't push it at all, like that buck I shot this year, I knew it wasn't a great shot. I knew he laid down, and I just backed out, and he was dead there the next morning. But if you go in to see what kind of sign you got, and the deer jumps up and runs away, I'm probably not coming back without that dog.
Yeah.
Because you are risking ruining the sign for the dog to find the deer, and you're risking pushing that deer off your property.
Yeah, and the one thing we did right on that deer was we backed out right there. We didn't want to mess up anything. Yeah. And and we didn't, if you trample an area and work it too hard, you're going to make it tougher for the dog. And
Right.
as you said, you're tipping over leaves or covering up blood sign and things like that. But, yeah, the deer that are not mortally wounded, you just keep pushing them. They'll
Right.
keep going. And if you're, depending on where you are, everybody's got a property line. You know what I mean? No matter how big your plot.
Yep.
And you're going to push them off it, And we almost did with that 6-pointer.
Yep.
Right on
He was
the
right
edge.
on the edge. But you look at that 6-pointer, you probably would have found him in his next bed with that dog.
Right.
If
we
you'd
had backed out.
have jumped him once and said, "Oh shit, he ain't gonna be dead anytime soon. Let's call the dog." Bob could have came the next morning with the dog, and you would have found that deer probably within an hour.
Yeah.
And it would have been in its next bed probably.
Yeah. So talking a lot about those scenarios, and that's like our big woods mountain style hunting where we are here in Naples. But some of the craziest track jobs you get into are when we're around like farmland. So if we're back in Lima or Mendon or
I think
Lake
those are even
Falls,
tougher.
they're super hard. When you get into goldenrod is like
Brush lots.
very, very difficult. So one of the things that
Jesus.
what?
Speaking of Bob Yaks, he just did his daily post of his 3 recoveries today, and one of them is a slob.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So, one of the things that I've found I've been hunting a lot of farmland, especially in the last, since I met Sarah. So what,
Right.
8 years, whatever that's been. But, even hunting with Chris and with Howie back in Honey Falls and Mendon and Lima, Avon area, you shoot these deer, and if they go taking off into goldenrod and you don't have snow,
Yeah.
and even if it's wet, and if you got dew or if you've got rain, it can just be, and I know that this is what happened to Connor, is that, that deer goes off running through a grass field, and it's like,
That's tough.
where do you even start? Like, that deer might be fine, might have never dropped an ounce of blood, but he may have bled, he might be laying dead somewhere.
Yeah.
But when you're in goldenrod and there isn't something that's like obvious, definite blood right off the bat, getting going and getting started, it can be such a challenge. So one of the things that I've definitely gotten better at over the last few years, hunting the farmland with the Kirsches, is finding, like, going to main deer trails. If you lost that, if you don't have good blood at the first hit and you don't know where that deer went exactly, and you're in a big area of goldenrod, go to main trails and look there, because a lot of times, even if they don't start out on that trail, they're gonna hook back because they know where they're used to running all the time or used to being. So check those joints in and out of those, whether it's big bedding areas or whether it's big fields. If you have nothing to go by, just walk the perimeter of the field and find where those deer trails come in and out, because there's main highways that they use all the time, and look there. And we've found success tracking deer a lot doing that, where we don't really have anything to go by, we're not having any luck, and you just kind of spread out and just start looking at all the main trails coming in and out of those areas, and most of the time you will find some sign, whether it is blood or if it's like you're talking about, tracks that are struggling or don't look normal.
Yeah.
Something to go by there. So, I mean, that's a tip I have for, if you're around farmland, but I don't know what you guys think, Dad. What do you think if you're in farmland area where you've got a lot of...
For whatever reason, it seems like most of farmland deer I've tracked, which have been on our old farm in Lima, I would rather track a deer up here in the big woods any day than to track them in the farmland. It's just, and it seems like they're always at night.
Yeah.
And we got lights and we're out there and we've been in old overgrown pasture lots that you go across, and if the moon's not out, I don't even know which way is north, south, east, or west. You get so turned around in there, and the brush is so dense, it's very hard, and you get, I don't know what it is. I should know after a lifetime of being around. I call it red brush, but it's the thick red brush. It's hard to see sign in. The leaves are smaller. The trail. I think that's good. I have less experience there, and I certainly have less success there. You know what I mean? As far as recovering deer, we do better up here, but I think it's because the majority of my life I've hunted hard up here, and I kind of know the lay of the land. We even know generally where the deer are going to go right now. If you hit a deer on this hill, we know probably within a couple hundred yards where it's going to cross the valley and go up the other hill. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we've seen it so many times. They do the same thing.
Farmland's
tough. Farmland is, I think, we're all talking. I think we're all envisioning no snow.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And you put snow is
That's cheating.
Yeah, it is cheating. So the farmland, I think it's in the brush fields and in the green grass. I think it's harder to find blood in there, and I think that you just have to really go slow and look hard. And as you say, intersecting trails, and that's where we get into trouble. Is the deer population is a little heavier down there.
Yeah.
And because of the ag. You have brush lots and wood lots that are smaller, and it seems like the deer are in there heavier, and there's more profound trails than there are up here. Mm-hmm. And so, we have, all of a sudden somebody will be on a trail, and you find out that the deer hit an intersecting trail and went that way.
Yeah.
But, no, I agree with you. I think it's looking for those trails, and the problem there is that you have no sight lines, typically where I've tracked out there in that thick brush.
Yeah.
And when you do... you jump them and you don't even see it. You don't even know you jumped them. You might hear them.
Right.
Yeah,
but you don't know if it's the deer that you're after.
All you know is it's 1 a.m. and you jumped a deer. So,
yeah.
Unless you can find the bed, you don't have a lot to
Also,
run.
rule of thumb around here in the hills, if they go all the way to the top, you ain't getting them back.
They're probably okay.
Yeah. If a deer goes up one of these hills here, that's normally a goner.
6 Point was the exception.
That is the only exception that I can remember around here.
To your point, like a lot of times we'll see deer, they'll go up, but they won't go to the top.
Right. That deer didn't go to the top.
No. Like the buck you wounded on opening day 5-6 years ago, that nice buck that Adam ended up getting a couple days. I mean, how many times has that happened up here? Where we've hit a deer.
And then we'll find it later.
We'll find it later, and we will finish it.
Right.
And whether it's a week later or 2 weeks later or a month later.
Yeah,
look at that 8 Point that you got that I shot with my bow.
Yeah.
And then we jumped him out of a brush lot.
You shot him with your bow. We tracked that deer for all the way from the middle of the valley all the way north towards the neighbors.
Right.
And then I shot it the Sunday after opening day of gun.
Right.
And we
pushed it out of a brush lot.
Yeah, we pushed that brush lot that he went into.
Right.
He was still in there.
That's where we had lost the blood from Dad.
Yeah.
And
he was still in there.
Yep.
And then you ended up killing him on Thanksgiving Day.
And
betted on this knob up here.
Betted on the knob. His leg was all... And where we had last had blood was right below
it is
where I ended up shooting him. That deer on Sunday, he did not leave that area from Sunday to Thursday, Thanksgiving Thursday.
Yeah,
so for 4 days, he laid in the same spot and was still alive.
Because Dad hit him with a bow.
Yeah.
You hit him with a gun when he came out of the brush lot.
Right.
And then you shot him like 4 days later to actually kill him.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But like
that happens to us a fair amount.
It does.
Where if we don't get it that day, we may get it, 3-4 days later, a week later.
Probably had to be like 6-7 years ago. I spined a doe over in Corey's pasture lot. Thing got up and ran off, and Mike shot a doe on the top of this hill at towards the end of gun season, and he freaking headshot it. And he was like, "Booyah! I didn't ruin any meat." Freaking cut the thing open, and the back straps were all gangrene.
Oh god!
It was the one that I spined, and it got up and ran away. It was fine.
Yeah. So I mean, we see that here because we're hunting a pretty good amount of land, and the deer, they might go somewhere, but they're not going that far away. But moral of that is, all of those deer in all of those scenarios, we tracked them as long and as far as we could until it was just nothing left. But always in the back of our minds, whether it's something we're consciously thinking about or if it's subconscious, you're like, I'm going to go check out that side hill because that's the last place.
Well, you did that morning, that Thanksgiving morning.
Right.
We were all talking about where we were going, and you said there was a speck of blood up on we call it the point, on the logging road at the base of the point. And you said, I'm going up on that side hill, and I'm going to work across. And I bet, because I think that buck is bedded up there. And then, about like 10 o'clock in the morning, I heard you shoot, and you had him.
Yeah. That deer.
But we make note of where we last saw him.
That deer was he did not want to die.
No, that was amazing.
So the worst one that I've had up here, I had a Friday off. I believe it was 3 or 4 years ago. Maybe 4 years ago. It was a while ago. I was coming down off the North Hill, and there was a big buck just locked on a doe just off the logging road. And it was probably like a 20, 25-yard shot. And we kind of startled each other, but then he wasn't running away. And I'm like, why is he not running away? And there's a freaking doe standing there, and he was just stupid, just absolutely stupid. It was the biggest buck I've ever shot at. And I drew back and put the pin on the shoulder and shot, and it crushed him, but it was a shoulder shot. And I had penetration, but I couldn't tell how much. And he turned and ran away. The arrow was flopping out of his shoulder, So I knew it was a shoulder shot. I'm like, this deer's going to need a while. I'm like, I'm going to wait for somebody else to get here. I think that was like 10 in the morning. And I believe at like 3 in the afternoon, Adam got here. And we went back there to where I hit. And we went up there to where I hit him. And expecting not to find much blood with a shoulder shot. It was like somebody freaking dumped a paint can up the hill. And there was just freaking mass amounts of blood. And he went to where I hit him was probably halfway to the top. And he turned and ran to the top. And we tracked him up there on an amazing blood trail. And we get into the first spot that he bedded, and it looked like a damn massacre. And I'm like, this deer is dead here somewhere. And we went to the next bed, same thing. I'm like, this is unbelievable. He's got to be laying right here somewhere. And then out of that bed, it turned into specks. Then I found the arrow, and then blood was just gone.
Yeah.
And we tracked that deer on specks all the way across the top of that hill till it was too dark to continue, and we really didn't have flashlights, I don't think. And at that point, he was getting to be a ways away from where I hit him, and we're like, this isn't looking good. But we went back the next morning and kind of fanned out on last blood. And I believe it was probably 200 to 300 yards from there. We were just kind of taking deer trails around, and I was on a trail going back down the hill. And I found one speck of blood. And we worked that down there, and we worked that whole side hill and never found anything else on him. But that had to have been a one lung hit.
Yeah.
Because there was bubbles in the blood, and there was an outrageous amount of blood.
I remember that next day we tracked.
And
I was with you. We searched everywhere.
That was the same day I shot my buck over here.
Yeah.
Because
You're right.
we went over on that Saturday after I got mine.
Yep.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
Yeah.
So I think the lesson that I learned on that one, and it's something that I've seen a couple different people say, is if you got a one lung hit, the best thing you can do is stay on them.
And just keep them bleeding.
Just keep them pumping.
Yeah.
Because that deer dumped so much freaking blood. It is a miracle that he was still alive.
If you can, in some situations, it's like if you're only hunting 40 acres or 50 acres and you don't have permission to go on the neighbor's property,
But I mean, that had to have been
line.
130, 140 inch deer. I mean, I'm
tracked him a long
I'm
ways,
sure he
too.
lived. And I was back in that spot late in muzzleloader with our buddy Chris, and we were coming down that hill where I had last blood, and he was like, buck, buck, buck. And we looked across the ravine, there was this great big buck just dipped over the edge. And
Probably him.
I am almost positive it was him. And it seems like up here, when you hit a good buck,
They go back to their home.
they go back home.
Yeah,
Their home range,
great,
and you'll see him there again.
that's a great point.
They go home.
Yeah.
And we saw that buck there late in muzzleloader. And I saw a little buck that he said there was two. I saw the little one, and he said the other one was big. I described the buck that I hit with my bow, and he was like, dude, that was that deer. He was like, it was a real dark chocolate rack. He was out to his ears or a little better, and just heavy, thick, tall. And he was like, yeah, that was that deer. And I'm like, son of a bitch, he made it.
Yep. It's pretty crazy when you start thinking about all the different, we've Dad, you've killed a ton of deer in your life. Jimmy's killed a lot of deer. I'm getting there. And there's just so many stories about, like they're not all perfect, clean, 30-second, they're out.
No, and
hard
almost
shots.
all the track jobs are a little different.
Yeah.
Either the terrain, the time of year, the type of hit. So I think that you know, like I like when we track, you know, together. You know, and it's usually Mike with us. Usually Uncle Mike's with us, and but we, you know, a lot. If we have enough guys, one guy will be on flank, just like watching ahead, and then we'll have a couple guys that are intently tracking, and somebody marking last blood, and there's no talking. It's hand signals. Everything's like stealth mode.
Yeah.
You know,
gotta go slow too.
Yeah. Because that deer
Absolutely
could be, like, example, like Connor called me last week, and I'm on my end of the phone, so I can talk, you know, but he's talking like this loud, and I'm like, hey, you want to? I'm like, be quiet.
keep your voice down.
I'm like, that deer could be laying in that goldenrod 20 yards.
Now
in
he
front of
knows
you.
where you are, and he knows you're there.
So it's like, but it's stuff that, you know, Jimmy and I were in your back pocket at 8 years old.
Yeah, 9. I think
9 years old, blood trailing.
I think
deer.
you were both 9 when each of you was 9 years old when you were with me when we took our first deer. You know.
Yeah.
So I mean, you've had, and when you're with me, Joel, Mike, you've always been with one of us. You know, since you were
so
little
like
boys.
you learn that stuff at a young age, and it's just become second nature. And you know, so like for someone new that's getting into it, you don't know. You just put a projectile into an animal. That animal must be dead. Like that's a general mindset.
Right.
If you hit a human with an arrow, they're gonna be rolling around on the ground. Oh my God, that hurts so bad. Like you're gonna.
These things are tough.
They are.
They're tough.
And the only thing they care about is survival.
Right.
So, you know, like to that point, like all the way circling right back around. When that projectile, whether it's a bullet or an arrow, leaves your weapon, like I'm guilty as anybody that that buck I shot there on that Halloween. The second that arrow came out of my bow and I saw it hit the deer and the deer took off running, I'm like pounding my chest and I'm like, yeah, I'm like all pumped up. And what I did,
should have been paying attention.
I didn't pay attention to the deer.
Yeah,
because I thought I hammered it. I was a little bit back and the angle was so steep that arrow was in and out of that deer in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
You know, and so like if you're not, you have got to pay attention the moment that you pull that trigger on that bow or that gun, because
that's the first piece of evidence that defines how the rest of the story is going to go, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, you got to keep an eye on that deer as long as possible.
Yep.
You got to watch what it's doing. I mean, I shot one with my muzzleloader up on the property line. It was me and Mike here. We took the first week a gun off together, and he was across the property line from me. We were covering the two sides, and I had a nice that was a 9-point. I had a nice 9-point come across, and I took him at about 75 yards with my muzzleloader. And I shot, and he jumped and kicked and took off running, and I can see a ways down the hill. And the last I saw of him, he stopped and he stood there, and I'm like, shit, this isn't good, because normally you're shooting them, they're running, and when you can see that far, you're watching them go down, you're watching them flip over, you're watching them do something. And he just stopped. He ran hard, and then he stopped, and he just stood there. And I'm like, son of a bitch. And then all of a sudden, I'm watching him with my binoculars, and you just see his tail. And it started kind of slow, and then it started going faster and faster and faster. And it was going like 100 miles an hour. And all of a sudden, he was gone. I'm like, what the hell? So Mike comes over. I stayed in the tree stand, and I walked him to where I shot the deer. And right away, he was like, yeah, it's all kicked up. He's like, I see some blood. So I got down and went over to him, and he followed the blood. There was no snow. It was just kind of leaves kicked up. You could see a little blood here and there. He followed the blood, and where we were was pretty thick. When you're on the ground, when you're in the tree stand, you can see it. But when you're on the ground, it's pretty close cover in there. And I kind of stayed at the ready, you know, in case, because we were closing in on the last spot that I saw him. And that next move that he made, I didn't see. But that last time I saw him, he was sitting there with his tail going 100 miles an hour. And that next move that he made was he basically flipped off the edge of the logging road, and he was laying right there dead. But that was something that I had never seen before.
Yeah.
You know, to sit there and watch their tail and kind of judge on what they're doing by that. I mean, he was hit. I think I double lunged him. But I think he was standing there, and he was just standing there basically dead.
Yeah.
And he was just trying to figure out what to do. And his tail was just It's just
All right. Sorry about that, everybody. We had the batteries die on
pretty near batteries died.
pretty near. So, Jimmy, we were talking about tails fluttering is where we finished.
Tail flutter.
I think that's a great thing to point out, especially if that deer is run off and it's stopped. That you can tell a lot by the body language of the deer, and their tail is telling a lot about if it's a slow flicker. They might, that's kind of like sometimes they do that when they're gut shot. They'll kind of lightly flicker their tail.
A lot of times when it's kind of like a slow flicker, it's almost like a safe thing. Like,
yeah, they use their tail to communicate.
I mean,
hello, how are you? I'm okay.
Well, I see when they're injured,
shit didn't hurt that bad.
you'll see that tail flicker like that. It makes me think of the.
But I mean, that tail was going nonstop, just as fast as it could go back and forth.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can't recall seeing that.
And the next thing it did was flipped over the bank and died. So, that's a pretty good.
If you see a deer doing anything erratic, it's probably dying.
So there was
a general statement.
You guys remember I used to have a ground blind way back in the valley.
How could you forget?
Legend.
And,
yeah.
So
we're gonna have a whole podcast on the.
I killed I don't know how many bucks back there that made the record books, right? But do you know? I don't know if I ever told you this.
I don't know if they're ever.
But there's
your record.
They're in the books. Yeah. Believe me,
the Bean Hill Meat Cutters record book.
So they're but 3 of those. I don't know if I ever told you this, but 3 of those bucks have been hit already. They were wounded.
Really?
And
so they're not really. I mean, that's not.
Well, they were more mercy kills than anything.
Well, it made me think of it. That 11 point that I got back there. I never saw him. What gave him up was his tail flicker, and I was looking up there, and it's just like beach, thick knobs, and I'm looking up there, and all I see is this tail flicking, and I get the binoculars, and I'm looking, and then I could see like the back end of the deer, and I'm looking for the front end. All of a sudden, I just see these horns. The thing is huge, and but long story short, it's just interesting to me that 3, trophy class bucks were all headed in the exact same direction up into those thick beach, and I think 2 of them were on opening day, and the other one was on Thanksgiving Day, but most of them had like hits to the legs, like they were running across there's some ag fields up on top of that North Hill, and somebody was shooting at him, but one had a clean wound right straight through the neck. Matter of fact, Bob Madigan, the guy that used to own this camp, right? I was hunting out of his camp, but he shot that deer over here, and that thing showed up, and it like 3 hours later, it was walking in front of me.
Which one was that?
That 8 point, that big 8. And I had already shot my buck. That was back when you could shoot a buck on your doe tag, right? So you had a buck tag and a doe tag, and the doe tag, you could shoot an antlered deer with it if you chose, right?
Were these your rules, or was this like
no?
State?
That was Bean Hill Meat Cutter rules.
Right.
No, seriously, that's the way it used
Bird near.
So me, I mean, I would shoot the first legally antlered buck I saw, right?
Yeah.
So first thing in the morning, I shoot like a 5 point or something, and so I got the deer out, and I went back there for the day, so I got all this food with me and everything. So I'm like, I'll just hang out and eat Girl Scout cookies and bologna sandwiches, and so I'm like, why? So I'm back there and I eat everything I have. So now I'm stuffed, and I'm gonna head back like at lunchtime or something. And it's like,
you ate all that by lunchtime?
Yeah, before lunch I ate everything I had. So then so I'm sitting there getting ready to pack up, and it's like 11 o'clock in the morning, and I just catch something up on the side hill that, like against the sun, and so I look at my binoculars, and it's the beam. A big beam of a buck. I'm like, what the heck, And I'm like, I still got my doe tag. So that deer actually came down, angled right to me, and walked right in front of me. It was like, I don't know, 20, 25 yards broadside. Back then, there was no logging roads back there. It was just woods. And so I shot the deer, and the deer dropped. And
he hit the ground.
So then I had the 2 of them, and but I dragged him back, and I remember when I got back here and Bob saw it, he couldn't believe it that was the deer that he shot over here first thing in the morning. So, yeah. But it's just interesting that the wounded bucks, and that's where, like, if we go back, like if we hit a deer on this hill, that's the area we go to.
Yeah.
Because we know they cross and go there. So they've done that for years. It's just the
terrain. Got that doe over there. Remember, I was going back in the
Yes,
valley late in
yes.
season
I
to pick
forgot
up
about
a climber I had left back there.
It was right by my blind where I
Yeah.
killed that doe. I finished it off.
Yeah, so I was coming around the backside of the hill into the valley, and I saw a doe standing there, and I had my gun, so I take the gun and I'm pointing it at her just to look at her. I wasn't gonna shoot it off 4-wheeler, but I'm pointing the gun at her, and I'm like, what in the frick is hanging off her face? Like, something is hanging off her face. I'm like, was she bedded and stood up and there's like leaves and stuff stuck there? I finally realized it was her jaw. It was hanging off her freaking face.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh my God. And I forget why. Or maybe I didn't have a tag or something. I don't remember. But I didn't shoot at it, and it took off running. And maybe that's why I didn't shoot it, because it was running. I don't remember. But I didn't take a shot at it. And I had called you, and Joel and Mike came over. We all got together, and we all started kind of there was snow.
I think there was snow on the ground.
We were following the track. We sent Joel up around the top, and he got above it and actually kicked it back down right out of that spot that you were saying with the bucks that you've been shooting up back by your blind. It came back down out of there, and we shot her on the logging road and got her. But somebody had hit her in the jaw with a rifle.
Wow.
And the jaw was hanging off her face.
Yeah, we were glad to finish it. But you hate to see a deer suffer like that.
But it was a wounded deer, same area. You know.
Yeah.
Well,
interesting.
It's hilarious. Well, let's think about that. I mean, we're trying to figure out where all these deer are going and where they're living, though, especially these big bucks. It's like, and we just made the comment, I mean, these deer are going back to where they feel the safest.
Right.
Maybe that's some of these areas where it's where they're living.
You look at where we find these, like Adam, the buck that Adam finished off, it was a buck I shot on opening day. Don't ask me why. I shot 7 times at that deer, and it was
you
not
were
that
hung
far
over
away. It
is
was
what
just,
happened.
Yeah.
No,
we had a
no.
We had a humdinger.
Was that the night that I was hanging from the meat
That
pole?
may have been.
No, because that wasn't an opening day. That was a Thanksgiving Eve.
When we were testing
that you were hanging from the meat pole.
No, that was opening day.
No, it was
yes,
not.
it was, because morning, the next morning, I was in bad shape, and I was up to the top of the hill with Uncle Mike, and I could not find my tree stand. It was the darkest morning I've ever been in the woods, and I was standing on the side hill on opening day, and I didn't know I couldn't find my tree stand. That was the night before opening day.
I don't think that was
yes,
opening
it was.
day.
But that buck, to go back to the point of the story.
Okay, sorry.
That buck stayed on that side hill. And Mike found him bedded, on the side hill, and just like you found that other one bedded over on this. So that's, it's
and he
interesting
didn't know at
to
the time that was the one you had hit.
Right.
He just found a buck bedded, and he didn't have a
no,
tag.
because Mike called me on the phone, I think, or the radio or something, and said, "Hey, I found your buck. Do you want him? He's over here. You want to finish him off?" He goes, "I already, I don't have a tag." And I said, "I thought Adam was over there with you," and he said he is. I'm like, "Well, let him finish it off and let him take it." So Adam ended up taking that.
We were all posted up down below. I mean, we were all around.
Yeah.
We had the deer surrounded, but Adam and Tim had hiked up to the top of the hill, and Mike put him on it.
But it is interesting, though, that it went to the same area where that 6-point went, cross and went up over in there, So that's.
They're not, like, when we shoot them, they're not going over here and bedding in the middle of our property. They're not doing that.
No.
They head back for those steep beach knobs way back in the valley.
Beach knobs.
Beach knobs.
If you ever lose a deer, go look on a beach knob.
Beach knob.
That's where my buck went back to.
That's a tip.
Beach knobs.
Hot tip. Find some beech trees, because they hold their leaves the
It's
longest.
almost like they're going for a glass and tip.
They're going for so that they can glass you.
So they can glass you coming to find them.
Jesus. I mean, it's all coming together. This is not that hard.
No, it's
You just
pretty
got to
simple.
talk about it. And then all of a sudden it's
And then when you
obvious.
think you have it all figured out, it'll be completely wrong.
Right. Then they'll throw you for a loop. So that's all good conversation there too. Now the other thing that I think we've all experienced a time or two is deer that, especially mature deer, whether it be a doe or a buck, that will double back on their track, or they'll do a big loop. And if you're not paying attention, you won't even know that they took you on a loop. Next thing you know, you don't know whether you're following that deer in direction A or direction B. And like that happened to us in PA 3 years ago.
Were you tracking a deer?
Yeah, Bob hit a buck, and the buck I was on Bob hit the buck coming down in through a clear cut, and it was at the start of we do these big long still hunts, and I was a sitter. That buck came across, he shot, he hit it. It appeared to be a meat hit. The buck didn't. We tracked him. Moral of the story, tracked him for like the entire day and never got him. And we were just on him the whole time, but he was fully aware of what was going on. That deer hardly ever bedded. But what that deer did, he came up the hill, and I had an opportunity at him, and I pulled my gun up, and he is giant. And I pull my gun up, and I don't have my scope caps flipped. And that deer, I pulled the gun up my shoulder, I looked through the scope, and I'm seeing black. And by the time I got my scope caps flipped up, he was already gone. But that deer, so it was interesting. Bob hit that buck, and he came across the bottom of it was down in the bottom of a big valley, and the buck came up the side of the hill that I was on. He was by himself. When he got up on that side hill, he got into some thick pines, and he got in between and in with a group of like 8 or 10 does. And he was just wandering around and mingling in with that group of does. And when I seen him and I had the opportunity to shoot at him, he wasn't that far. He was under 100 yards with a rifle. It's not that hard of a shot, but he was right in with those does. So trying to figure out which one he is and with that group. And then by the time I had that and then didn't have my caps up, didn't get the shot. But what happened was, and we didn't realize it until hours later and miles of walking later, that deer right then and there, that group of does all headed to the south, and he started to go with them, and he went up high and he looped all the way back and he doubled back on us. And so lesson that we learned there is I got to where all those deer were, and we found blood. And it wasn't a lot of blood, but we found some blood, and there was snow on the ground. And in that spot, Bob and I were standing there, and we were very convinced that he went with those does. But those, you get a group of does running through the woods.
Tracks everywhere.
And so we didn't even, we just blind, yep, went this way. Didn't really assess the situation around that area where all that broke loose. And when we went back there 3-4 hours later, sure as shit, you go 5 yards this other way, you see another set of tracks in the snow. There's his track by himself, and he snuck out the back and went around, and we ended up getting on him then, and that was around noon. And the whole rest of the day, so 4.5 hours or almost 5 hours, we were on him. That we jump him out of his bed, and then we were just on him. We had close encounters with that deer time and time again. And at this point, we use Garmin rhinos. Mm-hmm. So, we had what we do when we use those rhinos. They're great tools. And if you're hunting in an area where you can use them legally for hunting, you can get out there, and we put Bob on the track, and the rest of us were just watching him on the map to see where he was going, just like you were watching your bird dog,
right,
or your coon dog chasing coons. That Bob is on that deer's track, and we're watching that deer, essentially watching where the deer's going, and we're trying to get out ahead of him to catch him before he goes into this clear cut or before he goes into this valley. And so it's utilizing, in that situation, we should have caught that right off the bat, but then utilizing technology that you have to either follow that deer and see what way that deer is going,
yep,
or mark, and this is the other thing too, is when you're tracking deer, I think if you have the technology, if you have Onyx Map or any of these mapping tools, mark where you have blood, especially the first blood. And then if you start, turn on your tracking feature and track where you're going, because you'll start to see, if you're tracking yourself and you're following that deer, and you start to see where he's going, and you can look at the topography or look at a satellite view and see that there's a real thick brush lot over here, or there's a goldenrod field here, you can kind of almost guess where that deer is going. So if you're in a situation where you're trying to cut him off, you can use that as a tool to kind of from above, using your technology, you can see what that deer is trying to do.
When it's so hard. Like that deer, you guys were on him. You had technology. You had snow. you didn't get them, right? You know, things. I mean, it's just amazing because what they do for a living is stay alive,
Right.
avoid predators. You know what I mean? So it's like you're on their home turf, and they're smart, and they got the nose and the eyes, and they know the terrain, and it's just amazing. You know, the track jobs like that. We had one like that years ago that we always used to hunt. Gun season used to end on a Tuesday, and we would always take the last Tuesday off. And that particular Monday night, Mike had come up here early when the snow was literally like knee deep, and he went up on the North Hill and he found this scrape that was dug out through all that snow. And I'm like, I would go sit over that scrape. And I was over here, and so he went over there. He had to, you know, we didn't have the four-wheelers and stuff, and so he hiked all the way over there. And long story short, he shot over there. I heard him shoot, so I went over to check on him. He ended up hitting this nice big buck and wounded him. And we started tracking him, and then I think Joel jumped in with us, and Mark from the camp next door. He ended up with us, so it was four of us. But we were on the side hill with that, and we kept like anticipating where that deer was going to go and like leapfrogging out around to get in front of him. And we ended up tracking him way far north, almost to the ski slope property or past. I guess it was a little past, but up on top. But we ended up getting around him. But that was one of the few bucks that, and I think it was because all four of us knew the land so well, and we had snow, so snow was a huge difference.
Yeah.
And, you know, somebody would, you know, call on the phone and go, hey, I'm not, you know, one guy, Mike, was on his track, and the rest of us were trying to stay out in front of him. You know, I was down on the side hill, way out, had to try and cut him off. So it was kind of interesting that, you know, Mike called on the phone and goes, hey, this buck is headed up the hill. So, you know, then I started climbing up, and I went slowly because he could head back down, right? So,
right.
But it was very interesting, and we ended up getting that deer late in the day, and he was on his feet, like almost like just standing there under this big pine tree by the edge of a pond, like wondering where he's going to go next, because we had guys like, there was only four of us, but we were like closing in on him. And so I've seen him standing over there and jumped up on a stump where I had a little elevation. I could see him better, and, you know, and I shot him from there. But it's so few times that happens where we're on a buck that's not mortally wounded and trying to mortally wound it, you know, finish it off.
Right.
It's tough.
It is tough.
It's tough.
Super difficult. So I think that, you know, we're got a little over an hour here, so kind of start wrapping this up. But some of the keys that, you know, right off the bat, step one, what you hit on right away was, as soon as you make that shot, try to stay focused on understanding where that hit. Watch the deer's movements. Watch how he's running. She's running. Just be very, very attentive to what happens as soon as that deer is hit.
The behavior, the last spot you saw it.
What's that?
The behavior of it, the last spot you saw it.
Right. Yep. So that's number one. Number two would be, you know, when you get down, you know, give it time. If you don't see that deer tip over, give it an hour. Sit there, let everything calm down. Let that deer, if it needs to, bed down. But get down and go right to that spot. And even if you're by yourself, you know, get down and go and find that spot. But if you've got somebody with you, you know, Jimmy, you talked about having somebody come and you walk them to where the deer was standing.
Yeah, stay in your stand
if you can.
Yeah.
Right.
So, like, those are, you know, step two is make sure that you go and get to that exact spot where that animal was hit and mark that spot. You know, whether it's physically mark it by scraping, you know, a spot in the dirt with your foot, or put a stick there.
Just grab a stick and
stand it up, you know.
Yeah, do that.
Take an arrow. Stick it in the ground.
Stick an arrow. We do that all the time. If you've got, you know, a lot of guys will take
parachute cord or survey
tape, shit tickets, you know, whatever you got, you know, mark that spot, because that's home base. That's where you need to know where that trail started. And then from there, it's, you know, reading the blood. Do you have good blood? Is that deer bedding?
Take your time.
Take your time. It's not a race. Be quiet.
I do not like leaving last blood until I have next blood.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is don't, from now you've gone to where you had the hit. You've marked it. You've confirmed it. You got hair there, whatever, blood, your arrows laying, whatever. don't go to where you last saw the deer.
Right.
Follow the path,
Yeah.
because the path contains a ton of evidence. Like if you watch a
That's
deer and
great
it's running
information.
off,
Yeah.
and it goes over a crest, or you lost view of it. All right, don't go to where you last saw it. Follow that path from where you hit it to where you last saw it, and in that process, you're gonna, like when we found that doe I hit, there was very little.
Also, just a quick one here,
blood.
that 9-point that I shot on top of the hill with my bow, I shot it late at night. It was probably within the last 15 minutes of light. It came out 35 yards broadside. I never stopped it, and height was perfect, but I was dead center in the middle of the deer, and that deer took off, ran about 50 yards, and then he just stood there, and then he just walked off. And this was all like, I had my binoculars on him, watching him, and I watched him until I could not see anymore, and he was still there, standing, but he was walking in that certain direction. And when we went back that next morning, I had that pinned in my head, that last spot that I saw him, and we went and looked for sign. I think we had a couple specks of blood,
And we had snow,
but there was
overnight.
nothing.
We had a little snow.
We ended up basically grid searching for that deer.
We had
But
zero sign.
I had the last spot that I hit him, and I remember we got up in the tree stand.
And we knew where you shot, so we had a direction to travel.
Right.
And you're right. We spread out and we started a grid search.
I got back up in the stand, and I said, that's, the last spot that I saw him. I think you might have gone over there.
Yeah.
But then we kind of, I think I left you there. I think Mike was like 20, 30 yards down. I went another 20, 30 yards down. And then we started across the hill. We found him laying there dead.
Yeah.
But that was where he was laying dead was probably 70 yards from the last spot that I saw him.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, make sure you mark that last spot you saw him, mental picture out of your tree stand. Because I had no information except for that's the last spot that I saw him.
Yep.
And I knew it wasn't a good hit, so I left him overnight.
Yep.
But he was within 70 yards of where I last saw him. So that's one of those deals where obviously you want to go to your first spot where you hit him, get the information you can and get on the trail and go. But that marking in your memory, mental picture, the last spot you saw him, if you have no information to go off of, gut shot, didn't really have any blood. We caught a little snow overnight, covered up the sign that there was. It's a good tool to have as a last resort.
Right.
Yep. So we got step 1, 2, and 3, I believe.
Right.
And you're tracking that deer. You're staying on the track from point A, and following it as far as you can. You hit a bed, especially if you hit a bed within 100 yards and that deer's not in that bed, and you haven't given it really that long. If it's only been an hour or so,
You more than likely bumped it.
You more than likely bumped it. You guys would say back out.
Yep.
Give it some more time, whether it be overnight or give it 6-8 hours during the day, depending on what your weather is, before you go back in. And at that point, if you're alone, if you can come back out and call a friend or call your, whoever your hunting buddies are.
Don't be afraid to call the Deer Search New York either. I mean,
Don't
even
be
if it's
afraid.
not Bob Yaks, there's several guys that do it in New York
But I think
State.
that's the key is that once you've bumped it, you're just going to keep bumping it unless you give it time.
Absolutely.
Don't make it worse, right? That's one of the number one things about the tracking, I think, is knowing when to lay off and either come back the next day, or if it's at 8 in the morning, don't come back at 4 in the afternoon. I mean, you got to give it a big chunk of time.
Right. Yep.
Use your resources.
Don't feel bad about calling Deer Search or calling a friend and saying, "Hey, I hit something," because, I said in that conversation with Connor on breedinum radio this week, it's like you're not bothering me, you're not bothering Jimmy, you're not bothering anybody.
I mean, if I don't want to come help you, I'll tell you I'm not going to come help you.
But 9 times out of 10,
but take the offer if somebody offers it to you.
9 times out of 10, we're all going to say, you know what, yes, because you want to know why? Because we not only do we care about our helping somebody, but we care about finding that deer.
Right.
Recovering
the deer is important.
That's very important to us. I can speak for our family and our approach to this. It's like if you hit something, you owe it to that animal to give it every ounce of your effort to find it. And if you come up dry, we all know that we can walk away and say we gave it every ounce of effort we had, and that animal's probably still alive.
I would say 99% of the time, if we break off of something and don't find it, it's because it's not alive.
Yeah.
Or it's not dead.
Right.
It's still alive.
And we've done it enough where we almost go, that is not a dead deer.
Yeah, you can tell.
And we were joking when we were walking back from that doe that I shot a few weeks back.
Yeah.
I said, we'll kill that we'll kill it later this season.
Yeah.
We'll see it again.
Yep.
We will.
Yeah, well.
But I mean, we put 3 hours into that track.
Yeah, at least
3 hours into that track. I mean, not a lot of people are willing to do something like that.
Especially when you had no bed. We went a long ways with no bed, but we just, we had sign, right? So you keep going.
But we did not get to sign, really, until the first 100, 150 yards was up.
Yeah.
A lot of people would have been like, well,
I knew a guy one time that was hunting up here, and he shot a deer. He had a shot, thought he missed a deer. He went and looked. He didn't see any blood, and then the deer ran a certain direction. And I was up here hunting a few days later, and I found the deer laying dead. And I think that, sometimes you'll shoot a deer. And remember we talked about going from the spot where you shot it to the spot where you last saw it?
Yep.
And that you got to walk that path. Well, he walked the path part way, and he looked, and he's like, well, there's no blood. I must not have hit it. And he came back. But if he had continued, he would have found the deer laying there dead.
Yeah.
Remember
that little buck that me and you got together? I was probably like 11 or 12. We went up Sittig's side over there.
Oh, yeah.
We popped over the crest of the hill, and there was like freaking
deer
10,
everywhere.
10 12 deer coming across the hill. And Dad picks one and shoots at it, and there's snow on the ground. And we go up there and start looking for sign.
And there was tracks everywhere.
And there was tracks everywhere, and there was no blood at all. And we're like, what the hell? That deer jumped and kicked and ran off.
And I was on it. So
and
we were sure we hit it.
We're like, that looked like a dead deer, And it's like, there's snow on the ground. We should be seeing blood. You double lunged that deer. And
we went a long ways before there was even a spot. Remember,
and what it was doing too is it was spraying out.
Right.
It wasn't dumping blood; it was spraying. So if you weren't looking at the snow just right, you didn't even see the blood.
And we found that deer. That deer didn't go far. It didn't go
he
100 yards. It was dead.
He only went 60 yards or so.
Yeah. No blood.
What type of gun were you using?
12 gauge.
12 gauge? Because I've had that. I've shot several deer with my muzzle loader, and I've stopped using those bullets I was using because I was getting no wound channel. I shot those 2 deer in Letchworth.
Well, that was a rifled slug.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was a saboted slug.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Rifled barrel.
Yeah.
So it was a 50 cal slug out of my 12 gauge shotgun, right? So it was
I did that that year that I shot that buck before opening day with my bow. And then I went up on top of the South Hill at like 11 o'clock the next morning, and I shot that real wide 7-point. I shot him. He ran up the hill, turned broadside, and I shot right before he hit the crest. And I went up there to track him, and it was the same thing as that one that you and I got when we were little. There was a little bit of snow to track in, and there was like no blood. And I'm like, what the hell did I do? Miss this deer? I had double lunged him. And it was like a spray, like a splatter. It wasn't, it wasn't just dumping blood.
Right.
And there was like nothing to go by. And honestly, if there wasn't snow, you might have gone up there and been like, son of a bitch, how'd I miss him?
Right. Well, how would you find anything in the leaves?
Right.
That's why I say it's so important. When you think you had a good shot on it,
Yeah.
You follow it for 25, 50 yards and you don't find any blood, keep following it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go to where you last saw the deer because
There's a
it
good
might be
chance
laying
it's
there
going to start
dead.
opening up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or be laying there dead, one or the other.
But sometimes they do open up late. All of a sudden, the blood will start late, and then it's like, so it's you don't know what you're going to get.
You don't know.
And sometimes I think when you get some of those shots, especially with a 50 cal, or a muzzle loader or a saboted slug, that I think sometimes that blood might be coming out its nose as it's running and breathing, and it's like flying out.
Right.
So you know what I mean?
If you put a projectile into an animal, you owe it to go out there and put in your best effort to find it.
Yep.
Because there's a lot of track jobs that we do that you could quit in the first 50 yards going.
And I'm sure a lot
Don't
of
know
people
how
do.
that happened, but
Yeah.
it's gone. It could be laying another 50 yards up ahead.
Yep.
So,
And I lost track of what number we were on or what the point was, but I think we're getting.
I think point 4 was knowing when to break off. If you jump it, give it time.
Yep, give it time. Yep. Use your resources. Use your friends. Use.
If there's no bets, keep going on it.
Yep.
And that's a wrap, pretty much.
Ask
could
for
go all
help,
night
take
on
your
tracking
time,
jobs.
put in your best effort. And
Yeah. And if you need, guidance, Pertinier Outdoors is here.
we'll Pertinier help you.
We'll Pertinier guide you. Just send us a Insta message.
Facebook
Insta,
message.
Facebook, Twitter,
We're not on Twitter.
Google. We're not on Twitter. We don't believe in tweeting.
No.
Tweeting's stupid. There's
It is.
nothing good on Twitter.
No.
So we're all getting kind of tired. Tomorrow we got to go.
Yep. We got to get some sleep so we can
do
get
some
up early and get
all-dayers.
on
I really
stand.
don't have to do anything.
You don't.
No.
You got to sit here and keep this
sitting
fire
pretty.
warm.
Sit pretty. You guys are like, oh man, I
We're
need
stressing.
deer.
Yeah, we're stressing out.
I'm gonna go out somewhere and find that doe that you guys are hoping a buck is behind. I'm gonna shoot her.
Yeah.
That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna feed her.
Feed her. So she can't get bred.
Yep.
It's real nice, Jim.
I pity the first buck comes by me tomorrow.
You just said 15, 20 minutes ago you're holding off this year.
That was
That's
more
right.
than
I
that was an
forgot.
hour
I'm
ago.
holding off. Yep.
He's getting old, Jimmy. He forgets the shit that he says.
Be nice to me.
Oh, you're right. Damn it. Sorry, I owe you.
So
Something.
All right. So what's up next?
we also
what's next? I forgot. We don't do. This is a segment that we discussed. Most of the shit we discussed in the first podcast, we don't do any of that.
no. I mean it's
Yeah. Well,
that's
I'm still
because
stuck on that.
somebody wanted an agenda
Right.
and other people didn't. But I'm gonna try to get. We were just talking about this deer search, New York.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to have
And-
somebody from that group on.
Bob worked with us a couple of years ago. I'm hoping he remembers us, but I'm going to reach out to him and see if I can do a follow-up episode with him here about tracking and what New York deer search is all about. Because I'm on all these Facebook pages for hunting New York, and there's just guys on there constantly asking for tracking dogs, wondering what it costs, wondering what it does, what they're all about. They can carry a gun to dispatch an animal if they want to, and a lot of people question that, but it's all stuff through the state that I think it would be great to get a guy on there that's passionate about it and can really inform everybody what it's all about.
Yep.
Cool.
So what's next, Willie?
I think Jimmy just described it. Next up is some sleep and then kill a big buck tomorrow.
Yeah.
Fucking feeding them.
Watch your mouth. We want this whole podcast
Family
about
show, Jim.
family. Now, when I go to put this thing up, I have to
edit
mark
that
it.
out.
I have to mark it explicit.
Cool.
No, it's not cool.
It's about time. This freaking podcast is lame.
Not enough potty words.
Yeah.
Jesus. Well, yeah, you and I need to. Something needs to happen tomorrow.
Let's get after it.
Pitter patter.
Pitter patter. Let's get at her.
Get those rut sandwiches, put them in your backpack, and let's go get her
Just
done.
Feed them.
Feeding them.
Just let me know when you guys need a hand tracking.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the problem with this podcast is it turned into about 15 stories about all the deer that we've wounded and had to track down. But I feel like that's the reality. That's real.
You hunt for 30 years, you're going to have some deer that didn't drop on the first shot,
Right. You have been hunting for almost 30 years, haven't you, Jim?
I mean, I pretty much
22 anyway.
No, it's
when
been
you were
30.
a twinkle in Dad's eye, you were pretty much hunting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was born in the woods.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know if you were born in the woods, but you might have been conceived.
I don't know
there.
if
oh Jesus!
Holy shit.
Oh God!
Well, now we're marking this thing
I saw.
explicit.
Yeah, I saw
No,
that.
it's
I
no.
saw that coming. You put that on a tee for him, Jim. No, it's not always perfect out there, but
It's the reality of
it's
it.
reality. It's real. It ain't all point and shoot and tip them over. You know what I'm saying? You want me to wrap it up? Are you done?
No, I just feel like we're just
So which
rambling.
which one
Time
is
to
going
close
to take
it.
the last word today?
Yeah. Why don't you?
Well, I think we're tomorrow's a good day. We just had the cold front come through, and
We just talked about this.
I know.
right, I know. But you said wrap it up. So good luck to everybody when they hit the stands. By the time this hits the air, hopefully we'll be into chasing and maybe breeding them.